Tavares backhand towards the goal. Loose puck. Emily scores! Tie game! Can you believe it?
The last time the World Junior Championship was in Ottawa, fans were treated to one of the most exhilarating tournaments in the history of the event. This year's edition of the tournament could offer just as big of a spectacle. Team Canada will be looking to redeem themselves after a disappointing display in Gothenburg last year, while the Americans look to go back-to-back as gold medalists for the first time. The European nations will also be fighting to end a 5-year run of first-place finishes by the North American teams. My name is Kyle Watson, and welcome back to the McKeen's Hockey Show. The World Juniors are just around the corner, and before I head off to Ottawa, I recruited our Assistant Director of Scouting, Derek Neumeier, to help predict how things will unfold on Boxing Day. Derek, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
Glad to be back, Kyle. It's an exciting time of year. You know, I like to make the joke that for us in the hockey world, it's the week of two Christmases. You know, we get Christmas on the 25th, and then we get our new Christmas with the World Juniors starting on Boxing Day the next day.
It really is maybe just such a Canadian thing that we take this tournament so seriously. But yeah, I love it. Like you have the fun of the holidays and then New Year's. And then in between all of that, you have, some of the best hockey you're going to see all year. In many years, I think that this tournament is kind of offers more than the Stanley Cup playoffs in some years. But let's not waste any time. Let's hop right into it. I want to start by looking at Team Finland's roster. Canada will play them on Boxing Day to open the tournament. The team is led by Konsta Helenius, Rasmus Kupalainen, and Emil Hemming, and Kasper Halttunen, all returning from last year's team. The team kind of fell short. They didn't medal, which is kind of a shock for them. They've been a fixture in this tournament in recent years. How do you see this year's edition of the Finns shaping up?
It looks like it's going to be another quintessential year for the Finns. You know, they're usually right in the thick of things. Rarely one of the best teams in the tournament. I mean, they've won gold before. Kasperi Kapanen's winner, I forget exactly what year that was a moment that's, going to live in Finnish hockey history. But this year, it's a good roster. They got talent at all three areas. They've got a decent amount of depth up and down the lineup. I wouldn't say it's the strongest roster we've seen for Finland at this tournament. Not as much star power as maybe years past with guys like Patrick Laine being here. I think the Finns will be good. I think they'll challenge for the medal rounds. They just play such a plucky kind of hockey internationally. They have that reputation, right, where they check you hard, they grind you down. They always seem to stick in games. It's rare that they get blown out. Sometimes they get a bounce here or there and they take a lead and they hold on to it. I would say that's probably what we can expect out of them this year. Good players to keep them in a lot of games, but maybe not enough firepower to put them up with Canada and the United States as the real contenders in this tournament.
Perhaps the loss to Czechia for Canada is still fresh in my mind, but I think that is the nation that has kind of replaced the Finns maybe in the past couple of tournaments as that team that's just going to grind out wins and make it impossible to play against. Do you think that the Finns have the roster to continue to kind of play that style, or are they going to rely more perhaps on the top of the lineup guys?
No, I think they could do what the Finns usually do in this tournament, and which we have seen the Czechs do in recent years. They've been a gritty team in this tournament. They've been managing to grind out wins and upsets, including the one against Canada last year. And I think they do have the pieces for it this year. They have one of the best goalies in the tournament, Michael Hrabal, the huge netminder who was in this tournament last year. He plays in the NCAA. He's capable of stealing games for them when he's really on top of his game. I don't know if they have a lot of star power in terms of their forward group or their defense, but they do have a lot of depth. I mean, a lot of the Czech players play in the pro leagues back home in Czechia. So, they're playing against men. A lot of the teams have guys that used to play in the NHL and have gone back to Europe. So they're a little more advanced in terms of their maturity and their experience than maybe a lot of the guys in the Canadian or the United States roster. So that can be an advantage for them as long as they stick to defense first hockey and try and keep games close and try and check teams really tightly. I could see the Czechs being a team that does manage to pull out another surprise or two here or there.
Looking at Group A, Finland, Germany, and Latvia are joining Canada and the United States. Finland, Germany, and Latvia, all teams perhaps in transition from big eras in this tournament. Latvia coming off a tournament where they had one of their best showings, now losing guys like Sandis, Philmanis. Germany obviously had that perhaps their best era ever in terms of just the high picks that were being taken, like Stutzla, Seider, etc. But Finland, Germany, Latvia, from those three teams, for fans of Canada and USA, who should they be looking for as star players, threats, prospects that could be coming into the NHL in the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's going to be mostly Finland for that group. It's not a particularly strong year for Germany. They're going a little bit younger. They do have a few interesting players who are draft eligible. Carlos Handel is one. He was at the Helsinki tournament this past summer, had a really, really good tournament there. He was probably their best player, one of the best defensemen in the whole tournament. He is now in Halifax with the Mooseheads in the QMJHL. He's had a up and down start to his season, but he's a guy with a lot of talent. They're bringing a few other draft eligible forwards. David Lewandowski, for example, he plays in Saskatoon with the Blades. He's got some upside. It just seems it's more like a punt kind of year for the Germans this year, where it's more about getting guys like Hendel and Lewandowski and some others the experience at this tournament, and then maybe in 2 years when they're more experienced, they can lead Germany into a better finish. Same sort of idea with Latvia. They're bringing some 2008 forwards. I think 3 2008 born forwards are going to be with them. They might not be getting into games, but they'll be around the team. They'll be around the tournament. It seems like it's going to be the type of event where they're looking more to the future than the present. So I wouldn't expect much of a challenge for Canada or the US in those games, because I think those teams realize they need to look towards the future more than the present for this tournament.
So you were saying before the recording, Sweden's a good team. Finland, Czechia are solid groups. Slovakia could, be a dark horse, but Canada and USA are kind of out in front at the top by a significant gap as the favorites for you.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, this tournament fluctuates a lot from year to year. Sometimes a team like Finland has a great roster. Sometimes the Swedes are really strong on paper. This year, it seems like it's almost like a 2-team kind of race where Canada is great as always. USA is going to be great as always. But for the Swedes and the Finns, I mean, they don't have a lot of big names, not at least compared to prior years. I mean, you look at the last couple drafts. I mean, last year, there were no Swedes picked in the first round. In the top 10, no Swedes, no Finns. There are players from Russia and Belarus who went high, but they're not going to be in this tournament. So it just seems like it's a bit of an off year for kind of everyone except Canada and United States. I mean, we touched on the German teams in the past, like ones that had Moritz Seider and Tim Stutzla. Germany doesn't have players like that this year. Switzerland in the past had Nico Hischier, who's a great NHLer. They don't have someone like that this year. It's just a bit of an odd year where teams outside of Canada and the US, they just don't have a lot of big names. Usually there'd be at least one other team that looks really strong on paper. This year, I'm not sure that's the case. I mean, the Swedes and the Finns look stronger than the likes of Latvia and Kazakhstan, as would be expected. But it's just not the strongest teams on paper for Sweden or Finland or Czechia. And now it's not to say that things couldn't go in a surprising manner. I mean, the Swedes still have a bunch of players who've been drafted by NHL teams. You've got a bunch of guys who are playing professional hockey right now over in Sweden. Same with the Finns in Finland. So these things are possible, but I wouldn't say it's as likely as years past. I don't know if the whole tournament is going to be super competitive. I think it's going to be Canada and the US really duking it out for gold, and then all the other teams kind of in a race together for bronze. But we'll see. This tournament is always full of surprises.
That sounds more like what I remember the tournament being like growing up with the big blowouts. While those games still do happen, I don't know if it's intentional from the teams not wanting to run the score up or the competition leveling out and the playing field becoming more even. But I feel like we don't see as many of those blowouts anymore. But with what you're saying, do you think that's a possibility this year where some guys on Canada, the United States could be posting some huge numbers and approaching some of those tournament records?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think there's always potential for blowouts every year in this tournament, and it becomes a topic of conversation, right? Like, do you want 10 teams in the tournament? Because every year Canada is probably going to blow out the weakest team in their group, whether that's Kazakhstan, whether that's Denmark, Austria, teams that are in the lower tier right now of this tournament. So, but yeah, I think you brought up a good point where the competition has tightened a lot. Overall, if you look at, the last 10 years, let's say, it is a tighter tournament than it was 10 years prior. There are stronger teams overall. I mean, back in the day for Sweden and Finland, there'd be a lot of years where, their hopes and prayers would be on a goalie, right? But now they have certainly fleshed out their rosters a lot more. I think this year in particular is a little bit of just an off one for those nations. Maybe in a couple of years, the Finns will have a player who, could go top 5 in the draft or top 10. And, they'll be able to build their rosters around those guys. Or maybe Sweden will have 2 or 3 guys who are top 10 picks in prior drafts. So I think we're going to continue to see this tournament be closer and more competitive in the future. I think that's the way it is now. I think that is how it has evolved, but this year is maybe a bit of an aberration compared to what the new trend is.
So taking a look at this Team Canada roster, to me, while the 05s and the older guys are at the top of the lineup and some of the returnees are at the top of the lineup, it seems like it's a pretty wide open playing field in terms of spots being open for the taking. What did you make of the fact that A, they left some returnees off the roster, and B, as of right now, a guy like Carson Rakoff played as the 13th forward against Sweden. So, these, especially guys like McKenna and Martone with a lot to prove, these spots could be up for grabs. And, the Canada we're looking at the start of the tournament may be very different from how it ends.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Canadian staff have gone with a very interesting approach for their roster construction for this tournament. I mean, there was a lot of talk on Twitter and elsewhere when the selection camp was announced and the final roster was announced, because Canada did leave a lot of big names at home. Guys like Beckett Seneca, who went 3rd overall last year, Zane Parekh, from Saginaw, who was in the Memorial Cup last year, was a top 10 pick to Calgary. So they're definitely going for a bit of a balanced approach with the roster. They want guys to be in certain roles. It's not just about bringing the best players available necessarily. It's about ones that can fit in the best different roles and positions. But it's also interesting because it seems like they're keeping a lot of that open still. I think they have guys that they want to be competing for the first line role or maybe the first power play unit. It seems like they are trying to keep an open mind and leave some room to see which players step up. You talked about Rakoff being the 13th forward in the pre-tournament game against Sweden. I mean, that could certainly change. I think the Canadian coaches are very well prepared to be flexible with how things go with the first couple games of the tournament. I think we could see a lot of movement with the Lions depending on how things go. I think the Canadian coaches would like things to kind of gel into place earlier sooner than later, just because it would make things a lot easier for them. But I think if, let's say, Canada comes out maybe a little slow or a little flat in the first couple of games, I wouldn't be surprised to see some really, really big changes as to which players are on which lines and just kind of what the overall look of the team looks like.
Yeah, despite the amount of talent they left at home, I do think this group is very versatile in terms of, there's guys that can play a lot of roles and play them very effectively, like guys like Porter Martone, Cole Baudouin. I mean, Braden Yeager is a returnee. He played on the 4th line last night. No one's going to be shocked if he's the first line center by the end of the tournament, and that speaks to the quality they have. Through the first 2 pre-tournament games, the top unit has been all 2005 born players. So Tanner Molendyk, Andrew Gibson, Bradley Nadeau, Callum Ritchie, and Easton Cowan, with Carter George playing the first game and Jack Ivankovic and Carson Bjarnason splitting time so far. I'm just interested, to me it seemed like that is a mature starting 5 and that's capable of playing structured hockey, like Dave Cameron style hockey. And I'm just interested what you think of that strategy. I think that, if they lock in that top unit, although we're talking about how dynamic this lineup will be, I think it just leaves so much room for all the talent below them to kind of flourish. If you have one line that you can rely upon to play the most minutes and play in those tough situations, then you can throw Gavin McKenna on, Jet Lukchenko on against tired legs against bottom of the lineup and see what they can do.
Yeah, it's a difficult balancing act for the Canadian coaches at a tournament like this, where you want some semblance of stability and structure in your lineup. You want to have guys that you can always trust, that you can just kind of like pencil them in to go out there and do their shifts and just not be a liability to drive possession for your team. But you also want to leave just a little bit of room to be flexible with the players that have jump. The players that have, a lot of energy, the players that are a little bit more fired up or a little more focused or a little less daunted by the pressure of the tournament. So I think it is nice for the Canadian coach to have like that safety blanket kind of set up with some of the guys, maybe even if it's just one line, one defense pair, if you can have that as your foundation, you can leave some of the other spots open for, who's looking good right now, who seems to have chemistry with who. Maybe they try a second line in the first game and it just doesn't seem to gel. Well, as long as the first line is still locked in and you can rely on them, it buys you a little bit of time. You can use them to kind of keep you in the game if you need to experiment with the other lines. So, yeah, I think it comes down to a balancing act with the Canadian coaches. But having the veteran guys like you were just talking about, they've been around. Someone like Easton Cowan has played so much in the playoffs in London. And London's a development factory to begin with. A lot of these guys have played at the Hlinka or the U18s or were in this tournament last year. So they can certainly rely on a lot of those 2005 players to provide that stability. But I think it also makes sense to leave a little bit of room for someone like Gavin McKenna or Porter Martone or Matthew Schaefer. These guys who are younger and they might be able to elevate their games and be star players in this tournament, and you want to give them room to move up in the lineup if they've earned it. But you also want to give yourself a little bit of leeway just in case, maybe they're not ready. On paper, you could say, yeah, McKenna's fantastic. Pencil him on the first line. He'll be great. That's what I would expect too. To be honest, he's never let me down in any of the times I've watched him. But, this tournament is a new challenge for a lot of these guys. As good as someone like McKenna or Schaefer has been at the Hlinka or the U18s, the World Juniors is a whole different level of challenge. So the Canadian coaches do have to be just a little bit cautious about how they kind of ease in their younger guys into the action.
I just want to ask about the pairing of Callum Ritchie and Easton Cowan a little bit more. Obviously, they faced off last year in the OHL Championship with Cowan coming out on top. They've had, just Ritchie has had success at previous international levels. But in terms of their junior hockey career, obviously for Ritchie, the OHL Championship has eluded him. For Cowan, all that's left is the Memorial Cup and this gold medal. It's their last year. Obviously, both of them will be playing. But I just wanted to ask you about their chemistry and how they complement each other. I think that they're both players that have figured out in their young career how to play hockey that translates at the next level. They're very efficient. They are both capable of pulling off the incredible, and we've seen high skill moments from them, but it's more about the micro habits and, getting pucks on net, transitioning into the zone safely, this kind of stuff. And I think, thus far that line, including Bradley Nadeau, has just, look better than all the competition they've faced at doing just that and kind of suffocating the opposition with, possession hockey, shooting from the point, pad passes, getting the goalie moving side to side. They look like they've been playing together for years, but they're playing against each other.
Well, I think guys like Cowan and Ritchie are very much looking forward to playing with each other because it means they're not playing against each other. Someone like Easton Cowan is just one of the guys you do not want to face against in a playoff series. He'll just grind you down. He'll outwork everybody on your team. He's a real pain in the butt to play against. So I'm sure Ritchie's thrilled to, have him on his line now and getting the chance to watch Cowan do that to other teams. I think they complement each other really well. And Nadeau, I think the three of them are all very high-end prospects, but they bring different things. Cowan, it's about the motor and the intensity and the focus. Richie's, I would say, a little more cerebral. I mean, he can play a heavier game. He can up the tempo if he has to, but he's good at slowing things down. He's good at wearing you down slowly in the cycle in the offensive zone, but he's also got a lot of skill as a playmaker. Nadeau is very dangerous in transition, very slippery coming up the ice, big one-timer. So if you've got guys like Richie who can feed him the puck, or Cowan can kind of open up some space, draw pressure to open up opportunities for someone like Nadeau, I think just on paper, the line works really, really well. They're all three very high-end prospects, but they have different strengths, slightly different play styles, and I think those three complement each other really well. I mean, I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see that line stick together for the entire tournament for Canada, just because, like you said, it is working so far. It seems like it should continue to work. And I wouldn't be surprised if, those guys really do run the table in this tournament.
Before we move on to the American roster, I just want to ask you about the D-Corps for Canada. Brock and I, in our preview video, before the roster was announced, we're looking at Tanner Molendyk, Dickinson, Bonk, those guys as the top pairing. And we had Schaefer and Gibson as the third pairing, with Gibson kind of freeing up Schaefer to play his hockey and Gibson kind of being more of the stay-at-home. Thus far, it's been Molendyk and Gibson, who played together at Nashville Predators development camp in the summer as the first pairing. I didn't buy into this discourse, but there was some on the internet, why is Gibson even there? Just because his resume doesn't really pop off the page thus far. But, I think he's looked very, very comfortable in that role. And I'm interested to know your opinion on the decisions the coaching staff's made so far.
It's justifiable, right? You can talk about how Canada did leave some talent at home, but there is something to be said about guys needing to excel in certain minutes in certain situations. Like, Gibson's a really solid shutdown defenseman. He's smart, he's consistent, he handles and absorbs pressure well. And there are probably going to be times in this tournament where Canada needs a big penalty kill, or, they're defending a lead late in the game. Someone like Gibson is really good in those kind of situations in a way that maybe someone like Parekh isn't. That's not his strength of the game. But you need guys who can match up against the top lines and other teams, and Gibson has that. And I think it is important to try and look for some elements of chemistry for this Canadian roster, because it's a disadvantage for them. You look at, like, the United States, for example, with the national team development program, those guys know each other so well, right? You look at Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault, they're playing together in college. They played together at the program. Like, these guys know each other. There's a lot of built-in chemistry there that Canada doesn't always get to have. So you look at the pairing of Molendyk and Gibson, that chemistry is an advantage. I mean, they're not playing in the same leagues, but they do know each other by both being Nashville Predators prospects. You look at Sam Dickinson and Oliver Bonk, both members of the London Knights. Maybe if the coaches put them together in this tournament, those guys know each other a little bit better than they know others. So that could be an advantage. You can't rely just on chemistry. You still need to put the right players in the right position overall, but it is something that it has the potential to pay off for Canada, right? And we've seen this in years past where Canadian teams just don't seem to gel. Sometimes you go through the whole tournament and it just seems like the Canadians just never quite, they never quite click. They never perform to the level that people expect, just because the chemistry doesn't all come together, or guys just aren't really comfortable. I think that was a huge reason why they underperformed last year. It just seems like the team never really gelled as much as you thought they would. So I think there is some logic to, having a guy like Gibson on this team, putting him with someone like Molendyk, because, maybe they weren't the best or two of the best 7 or 8 defensemen on paper, which, I mean, they probably were still, but just having them have that familiarity with each other, that can be an advantage that we see throughout the tournament.
Yeah, I would love to be a fly on the wall in those rooms where the decisions are made on this kind of stuff, because, the discussion goes on the internet, but at the end of the day, we're missing a lot of key context as to how they made up the lineup and who they designated as a role player and who they're okay with having as the 13th forward that's skilled, but we don't want to have 2 of those guys because we only need 1 to come in, that kind of stuff. Because at the end of the day, I think that it's something you do need to have experience to really know and understand. And when you talk to kids or coaches or anyone that plays in international tournaments, one of the first things they will always tell you is that chemistry is important to figure a way to gel quickly in those few days that you have to prepare, or in some of the younger tournaments, a day to prepare. So yeah, I mean, we talk about it every year, and it's never something, you can really come to or like put into a percentage on how much you need to consider chemistry and structure and roles and how much you need to consider talent. But, I'm sure we'll continue to have this discussion every year because it is relevant. But yeah.
But the last thing I wanted to say on that point is, I remember years past people having this exact same conversation. Oh, why did Canada leave this player off? Like, they made so many mistakes with this roster, et cetera, et cetera. And then Canada goes and wins the gold. That has happened so many times. So I think it gets to the point where you do have to put a certain amount of trust in Hockey Canada that they know what they're doing. Because there are times where, they have a fourth line of like grinders and role players, and they end up being one of the best lines in the tournament for the team and play a huge role in the team winning gold. So we've seen that this works in the past. So it's not like these ideas are just coming out of the blue.
Yeah, I mean, another intangible at play there is you get a guy that's, whatever, the shock guy that made the team. How much more fired up is he when he's going out there to play? Like, these are things that are making up tiniest of percentages of what's going on, but it all matters at the end of the day. The Americans are looking to go back-to-back for the first time in their history at this tournament. I'm interested in just, if I just asked you that question without giving any context, what do you think their chances are?
Pretty good. This is a very, very good American team. Maybe not the best one we've seen, but it's pretty high up there. I like their overall balance and depth and amount of talent in every kind of area. I mean, you've got Trey Augustine between the pipes. He's been here before. Very consistent goalie, one of the best goalies in the NCAA right now, and one of the best teams. I think his team is actually still ranked first, at least last I checked. They've got a good defense core led by Zeke Bouillon, who was fantastic last year in this tournament. He's probably going to push for best defenseman in this tournament. At forward, you've got an entire line from Boston College with draft-eligible James Higgins, Ryan Leonard, Gabe Perreault, with Leonard and Perreault, being very successful last year at this tournament. That national team program with the States just really pays dividends for a tournament like this. They bring in the best guys, they train them up, they get them to know each other. And even though they often go their separate ways when they, go to college, those guys still know each other. It's easy for them to kind of come back together and have that chemistry. Look at someone like Oliver Moore. He doesn't play at Boston College, but once he's back with guys like Leonard and Perreault, like, he knows them so well, they know him. That chemistry is a huge advantage for the American team. And yeah, I think they're going to be, if not the second contender, like possibly the first. I know some people who think they, on paper, look better than Canada. I'd say it's, 50-50. I don't know if I could pick one of the two right now, but it's going to be a very good American team. They're going to be fun to watch. They like to open things up with the guys on this roster. They like to really drive possession. I think it's going to be very exciting hockey. And if nothing else, I'm hoping for some very, very entertaining, historic games between Canada and the U.S. when they face each other, whether that's, medal round or the preliminary games. But I guess we'll see.
Examining their lineup this year, James Higgins down the middle as the first line center, Danny Nelson, Oliver Moore, and Carey Terrance. Look, taking out Will Smith, who's in the NHL and was not released for this tournament, that's the same center core as last year. I'm just interested in how you think their forward core compares to Canada. I think Canada's maybe a more balanced top, like they could run four lines closer, but I mean, that line has got to be the runaway best line in the tournament. And like you said, they have the advantage of playing together.
Yeah, the Americans have the advantage of playing together. A lot of experience with this tournament compared to last year. I mean, they're bringing back a lot of guys who were on the team last year that won it all. I think Canada's big advantage will come ultimately with their depth. I mean, we were talking before about Carson Rakoff as the 13th forward. I mean, this is one of the best players in the OHL over the last couple of years. He's a fantastic product. I mean, you look at who the Americans have as their depth players. There's some good guys. I mean, by all means, guys who are probably going to play in the NHL, some very good prospects. But when you look at Canada's like depth, you got Rakoff, you got maybe McKenna as like the fourth liner, 13th forward. I think Canada's advantage will be having more of those kind of guys to cycle in and out, to bump up if they're playing well. I think the Americans are going to be a little more reliant on their big guns. And if those big guns start to get quiet, I don't think they have a lot of options to adjust on the fly. So I wouldn't expect that. I think the Americans are going to be very consistent and consistently dangerous throughout the entire tournament, led by their big names that we just talked about. But I think Canada has maybe a little more surprise power. If certain players get hot at just the right times, maybe they can piece together a fourth line that is one of their best lines in a way that it's unlikely that the third or fourth line on the Americans is going to be a huge difference maker in the same way that their first line will be.
I want to talk about the USA's D-core. They'll be minus Lane Hudson and Seamus Casey. Lane Hudson's little brother, Cole Hudson, the Washington Capitals prospect, will be on the team. Of course, Z Boom is returning and expected to be a favorite for defenseman of the tournament. But yeah, I'm interested in how you think it compares to last year. I think when people are examining this roster, from what I've read, these are where the question marks lie.
Yeah, if the Americans did have a notable weakness, this would probably be what it is. It's the blue line. With all due respect to Cole Hudson, who is a good prospect, he's not Lane. I don't think people should expect him to leave the kind of impact that Lane did and is doing now in Montreal, because he's really special. I wish the Americans had maybe a little more raw talent to work with. And they've got guys who are really good. Hudson's good. Adam Kleber is a big shutdown defenseman who I really liked in his draft year. Ara Manetian, who plays at Boston College, is a really slick puck-moving defenseman. They've certainly got some good pieces, but maybe not to the same degree as we've seen in the past with the Americans. And yeah, it's easy to see a scenario where maybe their blue line just can't quite handle the pressure of a team like Canada. When Canada can roll 4 offensive lines, when they can beat you in different ways, whether it's with their skill or with their physicality, that can be hard as a defenseman to adapt to. And I do wonder about the American defense's ability to adapt. As a defense core, they're very good with the puck on their stick. They're good at breakouts. They're good at moving the puck up ice. They're good at maintaining possession. Where I wonder is about their ability to break up plays, their ability to actually withstand the pressure of the Canadian attack, absorb it, and transition the puck up the ice. I think that could be a challenge for them, maybe on the penalty kill as well. I wouldn't say it's something that is clearly like a fatal weakness for them, but it could be the type of thing where it's just a step below where they want their blue line to be, and that might end up being the difference in, let's say, a tight game against Canada, possibly in the gold medal game.
Do you think that Trey Augustine is good enough that there's a scenario where, we're not discussing the weakness of the United States defense?
Yeah, he's certainly that type of goalie. He is good enough that he can steal games. We've seen it out of him before at different levels and in different events. He really is that kind of goalie. The talent is certainly there. The mental game is incredible for him. The consistency. I mean, it's not hard for him to go through a stretch of 5, 6, 7 games where he is red hot and unbeatable. And in a tournament like this, that's kind of all you need, right? If you have the hottest goalie, that can be enough to lead you to a gold medal. And with Augustine, he's so consistent shift to shift and game to game, but he also has that ability where if the defense in front of him breaks down, he could put up 30, 40 saves and still guide his team to victory.
Moving on to Group B, Slovakia, as we discussed earlier, a nation that had, in terms of the players being selected high in the draft, its best period of time there with Slavkovsky, MSR, and Nemec. That period is over, but Dalibor Dvorsky is still there, and he is, on paper, one of the best players in this tournament. He leads the Springfield Thunderbirds in the AHL in scoring. He stepped right into the OHL seamlessly last year and scored so many goals. Hasn't really missed a beat. what do you expect from him in this tournament? And, what's the rest of the Slovakian group look like in terms of like, how much is he going to carry and how much help does he have around him?
Yeah, he's going to have a lot on his hands. He's by far and away the best player on that roster. He's very talented. I've been a big fan of Dvorsky since his draft year. He's going to be their first line player. He's going to be their leader for sure. And the fact that he's playing, like you said, hockey in the AHL this season and really succeeding at the AHL level, I think that's a great sign. I mean, he's going to be so much more advanced than most players in this tournament in terms of just, professional level of hockey. I think he's going to be a lot to handle, but it's going to come down to the supporting cast, which it's not great for Slovakia this year. You got guys like Maxim Sturbak on the blue line, a pretty solid, rugged, kind of a shutdown physical defenseman. You've got some forwards who have had some success scoring at different levels this year, but not a lot of real talent. You talked about with Nemec and Slavkovsky and Mashar, there were options that year for the Slovaks. It wasn't just one guy that had to get shut down or one guy that had to, play all the minutes with the risk of being overworked. I feel bad for Dvorsky. I wish that he had more support around him because, he's going to be fired up to be in this tournament. He's going to want to prove his country proud, but I just don't know if he's going to have enough help to make enough of a difference. But we'll see. I mean, we have seen times in the past where, a single player can make a huge, huge difference for their nation. And maybe he's got a little bit of that hero puck in him, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Sweden, of course, had that 54-game streak where they won in the round robin that ended in 2020. How do you foresee them doing in this group? Do you think they're kind of going to get back to their regular ways?
We've talked about them before, but I think so. I mean, with Group A having Canada and the United States and Finland, I think it's looking pretty good for Sweden in Group B this year. I previously mentioned that I don't think it's one of the best rosters we've seen for Sweden in recent editions of this tournament, but I think they have everything they need to kind of run the table with their group. They've got some good options in net. I'm not sure who's going to win their starting position. They've got three goalies who are pretty equal in terms of the talent and upside, and I would say that any of them could kind of take the job. Axel Sandin Palika is a very, very talented defenseman, lots of experience. He's been here before, very successful over in the SHL. He's going to be one of the best defensemen in this tournament. Another guy who could push someone like Buyam for the best defenseman overall. He'll be their leader. He's going to drive a ton of play from the back end. You've got good pieces up front, guys like Otto Stenberg and Anton Wahlberg and Felix Nilsson, like guys who've been picked pretty high in the draft, but maybe not true superstars. I think with Sweden, it's going to be a similar situation to Canada where they brought some more some more role players to kind of fill in their roster. I think they're going more for the overall balance and maybe have left home some names that people would recognize more, brought players who haven't been drafted yet compared to guys who have. But I think they're going to be just fine. They've got enough talent and depth and balance that it should be enough on paper for them to be pretty good. And I'd be shocked if Sweden if they didn't win their group. I mean, all due respect to Czechia. I like Czechia more and more internationally. They've had a good stretch in the last 3-4 years from tournaments like the Helenka or the U18s. They've been pretty good. But I just don't know if they're going to be quite on Sweden's level this year. And with the other nations that you mentioned, it's going to be a lot of catch up for them.